Do you hear that whistle down the line? I figure that it's engine number 4. Engineer got a power. Wait from here while the man outside shows. On the floor, sticks and out fire. Drum the scene sounds and roll. Wizard about the fiddle, sounds out the ring hour. Turn high, yes, sir, right here we are, drawing all the way.
And I am on the William Allen White board. And other board members here, we have Roger Heineken, he's our president. Lori D. Winkler. And then we have a past board member, Linda Schreck. And Linda is how we met Pierre. Linda is a friend of Pierre's and talked him into doing a program 3 years ago.
Postcards. Yeah, it was the 22nd of February, 2015.
Well,
I cheated.
approximately.
Sorry.
So anyway, so we're so glad to have you back. And before we start, I have to show you my
Stuff.
my little souvenir. So when I went to Guthrie in, when was it, April, I went to an antique store. And now they could have just put a sign on that said these are from the Harvey House, but it worked, and so I bought them. I just thought they were cute. And you think,
El Tavar, Hotel El Tavar in Grand Canyon.
wow, so they really are. And then my other cool souvenir, it's so cool. It says on the Actress in Topeka and the Santa Fe. It's a little lighter, and it has a little music box.
Oh my God.
Can you hear it?
Yeah, explain that. See if you guys have a face
Yeah,
off.
cute. So anyway, okay. So now, without further ado, I will introduce our speaker. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Pierre Sutphin.
That's pretty good. Pierre works.
Pierre has had a vast background from doing 28 years in the U.S. Coast Guard, including a tour in Vietnam. He also worked with the state of Kansas in various offices, including 10 years in the Office of the State Bank Commissioners. As a young boy in Southern California, Pierre had a fascination for trains. He spent many days down in the train yard learning all he could about trains, the companies that ran them. So give it up for Pierre.
Thank you for the introduction. That song that you heard came from the Bill Elliott Swing Orchestra of Los Angeles, California. And out of all the songs that come out for the Actress in Topeka and Santa Fe, including from the original movie The Harley Girls with Julie Garland, this is probably the easiest one to understand and most lively. Thank you for the introduction, Kathy. You know the thing for cell phones and stuff, please turn them off. You'll know that, but sometimes. And my associate here, Harvey girl Patricia Douglas, is here.
Yay!
How many of you heard the name Fred Harvey? Ooh, I like this. Good. This is the killer, the next one. William Allen White? Okay, all right.
We're in the right place.
We are. Harvey girls.
Ooh, I know.
Okay, all right. We're going to briefly explore these topics and perhaps entice you to pursue them further. In the spring of 1882, Montezuma Hotel was the largest wood frame building in the United States, had landscape park with shade trees and flowers, fountains in the center, flanked by lawns for tennis and croquet. It was illuminated by thousands of gas lights. Approaching this building, Red John and his men couldn't believe their eyes. They rolled to the park. They hollered, they shot guns up in the air. Good, it worked. Excellent. Galloping across manicure walks. Heard throughout the hotel, a commotion reached a man in a Groom Van Dyke beard, which I don't have, deep, cautious eyes, and he tried to ignore the noise and enjoy his meal. He finally threw down his napkin, rose abruptly. He walked quickly, drawing attention of the dining room staff and guests. By the time he left the dining room, the cowboys dismounted and were running riot to the hotel. He heard them in the billiard hall, taking target practice with Indian bullets above the bar. "Boys, put up your guns!" the Englishman called out, striding in the room. "Who in the hell are you?" Red John yelled back. "My name is Fred Harvey and I run this place." I'll not have any rowdies here. If you don't behave like gentlemen, you can't stay here and you can't come again. Now put up your guns and take a drink with Fred Harvey. But as the cowboys laughed, cursed, and taunted him, and the hotel guests started gathering, he walked over and grabbed Red John by the collar. In a single motion, the Englishman yanked the dusty desperado over the bar and pinned him to the floor. "You mustn't swear in this place," he told the stunned cowboy. A moment of silence. Then Red John to his men. "Fred Harvey's a gentleman." Brushing himself off, "I'd say let's have those drinks." When the drinks were done, they were served a midnight breakfast as well. The breakfast for which Fred Harvey was becoming famous for, and cup after cup of the best damn coffee those cowboys ever tasted. Red John and his men never made trouble to Montezuma again. Dale Carnegie, author of the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, wrote of a similar incident involving a cowboy pulling up at a Santa Fe railroad station to the Harvey House. He spied the dining room and sat in a chair. He didn't care about a menu, he just wanted biddies. Fred Harvey went up to him and said, "If you want to eat in the lunchroom, that'd be fine, but coats are needed in the dining room." The cowboy answered that he would stay in the chair. "Bring the grub." The coat rolled. "We have to follow because it's meant for our places. We want you to be a customer. We don't want you to go out dissatisfied. Yet we have to stick to our rules. Please wear my coat." Fred Harvey slipped out of his coat and politely held it up to the cowboy, who finally edged out of his chair, slipped into the coat, and ate his dinner. The situation was diffused. Who in the hell was this guy? Well, you gathered by now, his name was Fred Harvey. His pioneering vision for customer service would set the stage for the service empires of today, such as the Hilton, Marriott, Starbucks, and all manners of restaurant chains. He was the first widely known chain of anything in America. He was known even before Coca-Cola. At his peak, he had 65 restaurants, which included lunch counters, 60 dining cars, 12 large hotels, coffee shop, cafeteria, and candy and fruit stands in some of the major stations such as Chicago, Kansas City, St. Louis, and later Cleveland, Ohio. Fred Harvey was the name of a company. It was not incorporated or company, just Fred Harvey. Later, through his son Ford Harvey, the name Fred Harvey stayed in the spotlight so that the public thought Fred Harvey was still alive. Looking back, it was an ingenious marketing device. So effective that in August of 1939, a girl in Chicago was arrested for $50,000 extortion demands from Fred Harvey. She had seen his name in a lot of signs and thought he had lots of money. She didn't know that he died 38 years prior in 1901. For those interested, the $50,000 is equal to about $861,000 today. In his early years, he married and settled with his family in Leavenworth, Kansas, where he began to sell advertising to newspapers and to the railroads. He traveled frequently in his job and was appalled by the terrible and unsanitary conditions of train stop restaurants and hotels. Railroads were oblivious to one of the first of human needs, mainly food. By 1876, Fred decided to start his own company. The first luncheon was located in Topeka. So impressed the leaders of the new growing railroad, attached to Topeka and Santa Fe, that Harvey, through a handshake, and later signed a series of long-term contracts. The railroads built many of the hotels that he would maintain them with his services. Unknowingly, this first handshake changed the way America ate. Topeka had the first Harvey House in January of 1876, located atop the second floor of the station. Passengers made it a priority to leave travel to Topeka to eat in Topeka. Later, Florence, Kansas was added in 1878, consisting of an eating area in Harvey's first hotel. In the 1890s, a passenger going from Chicago to Los Angeles could figure about 2.5 days travel. So if he had all these restaurants, wouldn't the meal items be the same throughout the system? No. Consistent service? Yes. Menus were sent to the railroads in 4-day cycles to ensure that a traveler on the Santa Fe would not see the same choices a second time during the trip on the railroad. Menus were based on food availability and season. The variety of food was shipped by Fred Harvey refrigerator cars, which were attached to the passenger trains. So, when the passenger train stopped for water, for the steam engine, and food for the passengers, 2 or 3 Harvey employees would offload the expected items from the refrigerator car. If Fred Harvey found something good, he went after it. The honeydew melon was first introduced to the public by the Fred Harvey system in 1916 after cross-pollination by John Ganger on a ranch between La Junta and Rocky Ford, Colorado. The buyer for the Harvey Hotel and Dining Car System, a W.F. McCormick, was in Wachibi, Washington, September 20, 1915, to buy 18 carloads, I think boxcars, 18 carloads of extra fancy, best varieties of Wanchibie apples. It was the buyer's 8th annual visit to the valley. The writer who wrote this article ended with quality first and price afterwards. That's the model of Fred Harvey. One of Harvey's most interesting ventures occurred in Las Vegas. No, not the one in Nevada, but this was in New Mexico. The one in Nevada didn't come around until about 1905. Mineral hot springs were very popular as people, normally the upper classes, would flock to these places due to the therapeutic value of the minerals in the water. Thus, in 1880, Santa Fe purchased the Hotel Mineral Springs in Las Vegas, and with Fred Harvey made plans to build a large health resort. The springs were located about 6 miles from the main line, resulting in a spur built up the canyon to the side of the hotel, the Montezuma. Constructed of wood in the Queen Anne style, it was 4 stories high, with a massive tower standing 8 stories above, 270 rooms, and was the largest frame building in the United States. It burned twice, 1884, 1899. It closed in 1903 with the opening of the Fred Harvey operated El Tovar Hotel in the Grand Canyon, as the Montezuma could no longer survive as it needed full maintenance in order to get going. By the turn of the century, Harvey had fully developed his new business model and was well underway building a hospitality empire. Railroad towns along the railroad route from Chicago to California suddenly had first-class hotels and restaurants. Thanks to Harvey, the Santa Fe was the only line in the West where people could get decent food. And the railroad route from Chicago to California suddenly had first-class hotels and restaurants. Thanks to Harvey, the Santa Fe was the only line in the West where people could get decent food and passenger traffic, boomed for the railway. Harvey houses were islands of American culture linked to the homeland by the Santa Fe rails, oasis in a desert. Need some help?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll put you on.
All right, we can do it.
Do that side, I'll do this side.
All right.
There's a sign there.
I think you have to.
You got enough?
Perfect.
Oh, good.
Did everybody get one? Oh, awesome.
The next song we're going to play is called the Train Montage from the Harvey Girls song. And what we're going to do is something a little bit different than most presentations you've probably been aware of. And this is a last minute thing, so bear with us. Now usually when you go to church, right, you hear the first couple stanzas of the, so you get an idea how it's supposed to go, and then you actually do the singing. So what we're going to do here, choir practice or background is not necessary. If you're embarrassed, don't sing. If you're not embarrassed and want to turn your head, that's cool, because we're going to be doing probably the same thing up here. So this is how it's going to kind of go. Here we go. Get a rough idea. The Harvey system, I must say, primarily pertains to the absolute perfection in the way we feed the trains.
Perfection in the dining room, perfection in the dorm. We even want perfection in the Harvey uniform.
All right, so that's how it kind of goes. And we wanted to put the words in because it's kind of hard to understand it in the first place. And if you try to find this on the website, it's a challenge. All right, here we go. The Harvey system, I must say, primarily pertains to the absolute perfection in the way we feed the trains.
Perfection in the dining room, perfection in the dorm. We even want perfection in the Harvey uniform. Stop shoes,
train must be fed.
The train must be fed. The train must be fed.
Come thunder, come lightning, come drizzle, come sleet, come chasm, come earthquake.
The people got to eat. Come thunder, come listen, and we repeat. The train must be fed. The train must be fed. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe must be fed.
Awesome. We're going to the Emmys now. Okay. The Harvey girls, you guys are super. The Harvey girls were the first major female workforce in America where service was impeccable yet swift. Fred had hired some female servers for less hostile locations, starting with the Clifton Hotel in Florence, Kansas. It was considered far too dangerous to have single women waiting tables in forward positions, such as Frontier, New Mexico. Western restaurants commonly hired black men as waiters and busboys. The problem is that many cowboys were former Confederate soldiers who left the South to get away from the new political process. As a consequence, many of the waiters got little respect, lived in fear, and had every reason to feel the need to defend themselves against their own customers. In the spring of 1883, Fred received word of a midnight brawl in Sutphin, New Mexico, where some of the staff was carved beyond all usefulness. Harvey went on the next train to Raton with family friend Tom Gabriel. Upon arrival, Fred instantly fired the manager and the wait staff. Fred asked young Tom Gabriel to become the new manager and move his family there. To improve the situation in Raton, Tom Gabriel said he would take the job if he replaced all the black male waiters with women, but not local women. He thought they'd be easier to manage and less likely to get liquored up. This was a radical approach, and Fred was known to act in the brainstorms of his employees. Fred agreed, and the first waitresses were hired in Raton, New Mexico later in 1883. Gabriel's ideas was quickly moved and adopted system-wide, ads nationwide, 12, 9, 6-month contracts, the Harvey way, to a type of culinary boot camp, and so the nickname Harvey Girls was born. With such training, similar to the military, his employees began referring to themselves as being in the Harvey service. Ads for girls to work at the local Fred Harvey establishments appeared around the country. One such ad read, "Wanted, girls, Fred Harvey lunchroom service, apply, Harvey House, Emporia." Will Rogers, famous movie star, philosopher, humorist, shared, "In the early days, the traveler fed on the buffalo. For doing so, the buffalo got his picture on the nickel." Well, Fred Harvey should have had his picture on one side of the dime, and one of his waitresses with an armful of delicious ham and eggs on the other side, because they've kept the West supplied with food and wives. You ever hear of a corporation with a heart? We'd like to read a selection from Judy Morris's book, The Harvey Girls, concerning a depression family from Chicago where money wasn't received and they were stuck in Albuquerque.
During the Great Depression of the 1930s, whole families were coming out of the Dust Bowl, rode empty freight cars to California in search of work. When the train stopped, these people came to the back door of Harvey Houses and asked for food. They were usually fed there without a charge. During this time, Bob O'Sullivan, his mother, and his sister were driving from Chicago to meet his father in California, who found work. Because money was supposed to be waiting in Albuquerque, they stopped there and left Chicago without enough funds for the entire trip. When they reached the New Mexico town, the money was not waiting. So when they went in, the car loaded to the roof, stuck in New Mexico. And this is an article that he wrote later in his adult life for the Chicago Tribune. It was hot and dusty and late afternoon as we waited in the car for my mother to come out of the Albuquerque Railway Express office. When she did, she was very upset. She stopped at the steps, loading dock, for a second, wiped her eyes, and got in the car. And me being a little boy said, "Can we eat?" My mom thought for a moment, and she says, "Of course we can, we must." So she drove a couple blocks down the railroad tracks to a Harvey House and took us inside. When the waitress came over to show us the table, my mother took her a few feet away and said, "I can't pay for this." And the waitress nodded and said, "I understand." So she went back and got a gentleman in a suit And he came back and he talked to my mother in the same manner. And he said, well, let's sit you down and see what you'd like. He pulled out the chair for my mom. My mom said, perhaps just sandwiches for the children and coffee for me. And the manager steps up and he puts his hand over the order thing and he says, why don't we start everybody off with some hot soup? And maybe some stew and mashed potatoes with bread and butter.
I'm getting hungry.
Coffee for the lady. He asked my sister if we wanted milk or hot chocolate. We said yes. So he brought us both. I saw my mother saying thank you, but I didn't hear her voice. When the last of the cobbler was done and we rose to leave, the waitress brought us 2 bags full of leftovers. And my mother pushed 2 coins across the table to her, and the waitress says, no ma'am, we can't accept that because you're a guest of Fred Harvey. And so we got in the car, and Mom and my sister were looking in the bag, and I'm excited, and I was like, what's in the bag? What's in the bag, Mom? And she looks in and she smiles at me and she says, loaves and fishes, son, loaves and fishes.
In a small community, the Harvey House was the most elegant place to eat. Stunning places to have in many remote places, such as fine tablecloths, real silverware, crystal, and gleaming coffee urns, and of course, the famous Harvey girls. To many, these Harvey houses would seem like it should be in Chicago or New York City, like it was in the mirage in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly, small-town America could get fresh vegetables from California, fresh fish from the Great Lakes, and oysters from the Pacific. All kinds of goods that the Harvey House stocked from refrigerator cars straight off the train. News alert! The Republican nominee for state treasurer may be seen any day on his engine on the southern Kansas division of Santa Fe. So be on the lookout. In Emporia, where the train stopped, local people would come to the station and see who's who. Later, in the case of movie stars, the likes of Shirley Temple, Will Rogers, Jackie Cooper, Gloria Swanson, etc., could be seen on the Emporia platform. The Santa Fe was the star's preferred railroad to Hollywood since 1910. Later, Hollywood columnists learned to pump Harvey girls for information on traveling stars. One wasn't so lucky. Upon hearing that Carol Lombard had just
Would you like
said
some coffee? Would you like some coffee? I'll get you some. Pancakes? You look like a pancake person.
Okay. Upon hearing that Carol Lombard had just said goodbye to Clark Gable at the Santa Fe station in Los Angeles, a reporter asked a busy Harvey girl to help him with some fashion details. What's that Carol Lombard is wearing so I can tell my wife?
A beige dress.
What kind of hat is that?
Listen here, buddy. Get your own stylist. I have all these hungry people to feed.
Okay. After a 15-year bout with intestinal cancer, Fred Harvey died on Saturday, February 9, 1901 in Leavenworth, Kansas. William Allen White wrote, Fred Harvey, who is dying, has lived a useful life. He has done more to promulgate good cooking, healthful, substantial, wholesale, digestible cooking in Kansas than no the cookbooks ever published. Fred Harvey was a greater man than if he had been elected to something. This brings us to William Allen White. He was born in 1868 here in Emporia, and he was a National Law and Reform columnist of the Emporia Gazette, taking control of that paper later in 1895. He made it a point to know the passenger agent and advertising manager of the Santa Fe. White was married in April of 1893. When asked where he and Sally were planning to go on the honeymoon, the Santa Fe sent passes to the Montezuma, Las Vegas, New Mexico. En route to the Montezuma, the couple did a twilight dinner at the Harvey House in Florence. Commenting on the Montezuma stay, White wrote, of course we're always a little late for breakfast. The Montezuma was a pleasure palace beyond compare. He did an editorial, The Evil of Railroad Passes. He had system passes on the Santa Fe and other railroads, and a card from Fred Harvey directing that old Harvey hotels allow Mr. White to eat freely. I knew the system was wrong, he said, and for that, I had that hump in my back pocket like a camel, made for the big books of passes in my hip pocket. Railroads dominated many of the politics of the late quarter of the 19th century and in the first decade of the 1900s. Railroads issued passes to selected candidates, which would include their families and, with a little bit of winding, a close friend. These passes were as valuable as money. The New Haven Register in July of 1899 picked up this article from the Atchison Globe. It was titled, "Caught at Last." Will Allen White and his wife were in Atchison lately. Mrs. White tells the following story of her husband. Some years ago, Fred Harvey gave Mr. White a pass good at the Harvey Eating Houses along the Santa Fe, and Mr. and Mrs. White started on a trip to Colorado to take advantage of Mr. Harvey's generosity. At every eating house, he ate enormously and then proudly produced his free ticket. He had it a year and never found opportunity to use it. Mrs. White, who was compelled to pay for her meals, ate very sparingly, and some of the other passengers remarked how much the husband ate and how daintily his wife nibbled. When they reached the last station where the free ticket was good, Mr. White ordered everything in sight and simply stuffed himself. Mrs. White remained in the railroad passenger car and nibbled a little lunch she had brought along. When Mr. White returned to the car, his wife noticed that he looked mighty unhappy, considering that he had previously been enormously enjoying that Fred Harvey free ticket. He continued looking unhappy, and his wife feared that possibly he had flaunted himself and pressed him for an explanation. "Well, Sally," he finally said, "I might as well make a clean breast of it. The last one wasn't a Fred Harvey Eating House, and I was compelled to pay $2.75 for my breakfast." Upon Fred Harvey's death in 1901, William Allen White kept in contact with the Harvey family. In 1928, when Ford Harvey died, he's the one that took the operations after his father died, William Allen White sent a telegram within hours after Ford's death to the family. "I've lost an old friend, and the West has lost a commercial leader who is typical of all that the West holds fine. Enterprise, imagine, courage, honesty, social vision, and an understanding heart." A treasure set just west of Emporia on present Highway 50. Fred Harvey had an 880-acre ranch split in two parts just south of Plymouth. The ranch served as an experimental source for food produce and meat for his fledgling restaurants. A good friend of mine, Linda Sarek, and I took a drive in January 2015 to find the actual roads that bordered the ranch. I'd like to share some pictures taken at that time that reflect overall what the property probably looked like. In slide number, that gentleman there, his name is Don Cook. His family has owned the property that bordered a portion of the Fred Harvey Ranch. This picture shows the property across the street from Don Cook, where it's reported bunkhouse ranch hands once stood right over there. That's a probable Fred Harvey House ranch site. That's a closer look of the site. And this is a smaller split portion of the ranch, 860 acres in Chase County. All indications show that C.W. Johnson and his family was the caretaker of the ranch. The ranch itself was a getaway for the Harvey family from the hustle and bustle of Kansas City and the offices. Well, you know what's going to happen next. News alert! Johnson Harvey's cattle in St. Joe yesterday brought 5 1/4 cents, and their hogs topped the market at $3.82.5. Johnson Harvey are of Plymouth. A page from the Standard Atlas of Lyon County and Chase County, both published separately for 1901, was used to locate the property and integrate it with the road numbering system used today. For those interested, after this presentation, I have limited maps showing the boundaries of Harvey's Ranch, the major portion that resided in Lyon County. Later in 1901, the ranch would be closed as other expanded ranches, dairies, bottling plants, and farms under his name would be opened in nearby Newton, DeRail, Arizona, XY Ranch, Granada, Colorado, and Temple, Texas. The Harvey House and Emporia were interwoven with the Santa Fe Railway. The JD Club was entertained by Mr. and Mrs. H.E. Gaines at dinner at the Harvey House Wednesday evening. Okay, I'm seeing blank faces, sorry about that. You may have missed it since it occurred in January 1915. The Emporia Harvey House was where meetings and events were held and where Mr. White savored Fred Harvey's food. White's nationally syndicated writings contributed to the national provenance of Fred Harvey and the Santa Fe. Mr. White wrote an editorial in the Emporia Gazette, later published in the 1926 issue of Santa Fe magazine. The Santa Fe is too progressive, always at the head, has the best. It is a great railroad because it's managed by railroad men and not by Wall Street brokers. We wouldn't take the Santa Fe for all the mainline east and west roads in Kansas. It's the best thing that ever happened to Emporia. The year of his 70th birthday in 1939, the editor of Santa Fe magazine did an article about William Allen White entitled, "William Allen White Wrote Lyrical About Kansas." The article starts out with a summary about Mr. White's outlook. The editor who looks upon his hometown and its people with affection and who sees beauty where others appear to be negative has an advantage over an editor whose attitude is more negative. Mr. White shared his optimism of the future in the closing article. Life today has been broadened and pleasured by the pioneers of yesterday, even as life yesterday has opened a new vista to the young folks who built the new land. The ending was a quote from Shining Lines, which said, "I'm not afraid of tomorrow, for I've seen yesterday and I love today." Fred Harvey, the original founder of the system that bore, can you see it okay? Okay. Fred Harvey, the original founder of the system that bore his name, valued his privacy and was busy making sure his vast system were to standards requiring many trips. William Allen White, nationally known editor, was a more public figure, sharing his viewpoints nationwide via the press. Both men blessed and enriched the lives of the general public, putting Kansas in the public's eye. This concludes the presentation. Before we answer any questions, there's some Fred Harvey postcards on the side there that some of them dealing with Emporia. And the handout that you have here has some recommended references in case you want to go further. You're certainly welcome to take it with you. If you decide it's not needed, please leave it so it can be used by others. That concludes the presentation. Any questions?
Your map here doesn't show some of them then.
No, that's the reason. Okay, good observation. There'll be one in there. The reason why is that map is easier to read. There's another one that came out earlier in the early 1900s.
Oh, thank you.
Well, that's the Harvey.
Oh, that's not the right map?
No, she's looking for the one that shows the restaurants. I think I have it. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. That was just easier to print, and it came out really good. The other ones, here you go. Here's the one you made. It came out in the 20s.
Oh, that's okay.
That's okay. I mean, it's cool. This is the one you're referring to. It's got all the restaurants and stuff on
Oh,
there.
yeah.
But that one there, when I printed, I tried that once, and it was just too crowded. So I used that one because it's easier to read.
Well, I know there's one in Florence because I've changed it.
I'm sorry?
There's a Harvey House in Florence.
Yes.
And that in my study club had it. Went to lunch there and had Harvey Girl Circus. Retired teachers. Oh, okay, well, Circus, one of my organizations, retired teachers.
Yeah, I've been trying to get on the list. I think you have to have 25 people before they'll do a thing there.
That was my question, was a number of years ago, I went with a study club group or something, and we ate at the Florence Harvey House. And is that still open for
Yes.
groups?
Half of it is open, the other half was taken to a farmer's field or something, so half of it is still there, and the top floor has examples of what the rooms look like for the Harvey girls.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see the china and the way they serve.
It's neat that it's still there.
It is, and I thought by now it's probably gone, but see if it's still rich. How many do you have to have in a group to go there?
Yeah, I put my name on a waiting list, but I didn't check up on it, so
So it's like, how did you online?
I'd probably have to go online
Okay,
and get maybe, they'll put you in with another group or something to get on that, but it'd be
Okay.
really cool.
It would, thank you.
Pierre?
Yeah.
What are the active years from the opening to when they kind of slowed down? The Harvey House?
Probably the 1950s when airline travel became more popular. The demise of the rails really occurred when they built the interstate. And after that, later on Amtrak took it over in I think it was 75.
When did they open then? When was like the first one open? My grandmother was a Harvey girl, and I don't have any idea when or where. I assume the peak.
There's a, In Leavenworth, there's a, Fred Harvey's original house is there where he grew up in Leavenworth. And there's a site put on by the Historical Society where they have a list of all the known Harvey girls.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Can you-
But there's probably so many of them. I mean,
Could you get that on the internet or?
sure, yeah, just Google it or Bing it or whatever you're using as a search engine. It'll work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, did you have a question?
I was wondering where the Emporia Harvey House was. You know?
It burned, how do I describe it, Linda? The Emporia Harvey House
It was right down by the depot. I think it was on the Osho Street.
I don't think the depot's still there though, right? That was part that burned down?
Well, the depot's gone.
I think it was
Yeah.
on, but it
Depot's
was,
gone, but the
it
bricks
was
are still
right on, I think it was on the Osho Street. wasn't
Is there a
it?
picture of that?
Was it where Blaylock's used?
Yes.
That's right by Nashville, Blackhawks.
The asphalt parking lot that's adjacent to the tracks, east of where the depot was, is the footprint of the Harvey House.
Adjacent to the tracks.
Yeah.
I mean, the foundation's probably still there.
Well, it's an
I don't know.
asphalt parking lot.
I might have a copy of the picture of the Harvey House here. Let me see if I can find it real fast. Maybe not.
Yeah, that's south.
Well, he's looking that up.
Here you go.
Please stand up. This is the Linda that helped Pierre find all of the maps and
Here's that.
everything.
We had a good time, we spent all day out in the front hills running around and everything. So,
Actually, if you look at the picture, you can tell it was added on from the original. There's a real